Welcome back to Writing Done Right. Well, today we are going to talk a little bit more about audiobooks. We're going to jump into Audacity and see how we actually go about the process of editing an audiobook. So this is a little bit more of a complicated task, and I've done some videos in the past questioning, should you even be the one who does your audiobook? Should you bring on a professional? I will say that this is the hardest of these things to master. Let's talk about all these in this video. Thanks for checking out this video. I'm Thomas Borowski, an author and a technology consultant. Sorry for the weird lighting today, but we're going to be on the computer screen most of the time, and I just love the view I have outside, so I just want to keep the door open. But anyway, let's go ahead and get talking about audiobooks. Audiobooks is the hardest of the formats of books to get right. In other words, it does take a lot to lay down the track. It does take a lot to edit the track into a good, well-produced audiobook. You don't want your audiobook sounding horrible or unprofessional. But is it all that complicated? No. Especially when you consider the fact that when you are doing things like audiobooks and particularly narrating the type of story we're doing here today, the author actually being the one reading it is important. You bring a lot more credibility to the story if you are the one reading it. Now, the question is, do you want to bring on an audio engineer to do the edits? That is something you might want to bring on the cost for, unless you are really good with software and really take a lot of dedication and have a number of people who can give you real, true, and honest feedback about whether or not your audiobook sounds good before you release it to the public. There are some very specific requirements about noise floors, spaces, gaps, and all these different components, and you need to make sure you understand all that, or else your hard work may be cast out as your audiobook is rejected for publication. Now, I have not actually had an audiobook rejected for publication because I'm pretty hard on following the very stringent requirements. I do have a video about setting up Audacity with the plugins that you need. And let's talk briefly about the cost of bringing on an audio engineer. I actually, when I did one of my books, we had a hard deadline to get it done and I was not going to meet it. So I took the audio tracks, I laid them all down and I split them into thirds. I did a third of them and then I hired two separate audio engineers. One of them I hired off of Fiverr, did an excellent job, and it was a very low cost. I think I paid under $50 for, I want to say it was like 4 chapters they did. The other guy cost a lot more. It's because he was a very, very high-level professional audio engineer that I simply had in my list of contacts. I didn't find him online, and I knew I'd be paying a little bit more for him. I think I paid about $100 for him to do the same number of tracks. And then I did my tracks as well. If you were to shuffle all these guys together, you would not be able to tell who was actually the one who did it. Now, that is because I know a lot about software and audio engineering and things like that. And so I put together all of the different elements. This is something that don't look at it and say, well, I couldn't possibly do that. It might be something you practice at until you're good at it and you can do your own stuff. Because oftentimes it's going to cost you several $100s to get an audiobook done. Now, the good news is most of your big platforms like ACX, like Findaway Voices, who is now owned by Spotify since we talked about them last, they will actually have author sharing deals where you can get in there and you can work on the project and you can go ahead and have them do it at no upfront cost, but you're going to be sharing a portion of your royalties with them. That might be something you look into. It might not. You may have a harder time getting that type of deal depending on the size of your audiobook and your various audiences. So these are the things that you might want to consider. With that, though, let's go ahead and jump on over to the computer where we're going to be doing most of our work. So what we're going to be looking at here is I published my book, Half My Life, which is my testimony of why I follow the Christian faith. And you look at the website, I have the soft cover, I have the ebook and audiobook, and it's blank because I had a lot of weird turmoil going on last year and I just did not get a chance to do the audiobooks. The audiobooks take a ton of time. So I got to a really quiet spot last night, and I laid down the tracks for the first section of the book, which is 5 full chapters, and then I did the introductory matter as well. Those are all done. And so now I laid down a bunch of tracks, and I plan on laying down another section tonight, another section tomorrow, and hopefully have a good track to go. So let's go ahead and have a look at some of these guys. I have my final here. Now your final should be an MP3 at 192 or higher, constant bitrate in either all stereo or all mono. You just can't mix and match them together. And you can kind of see how these set up. Now I also saved the WAV copies. WAV copies are way larger. You can see that these 5 WAV files is 41 megabytes versus the 5 MP3s is 5 megabytes. But the reason I saved the waves, and in case I need to go in and make any future changes or edits, WAV files are basically perfect copies of the file. You cannot get any better sound quality than a WAV file. And so they are basically perfect. So if I wanted to go ahead, let's just have a listen to one of these guys. Half My Life, How Jesus Conquered My Soul, written and narrated by Thomas Murawski. So that is what this guy looks like. Let's go ahead and open this up with Audacity. And we talked in the previous video about getting your system set up with ACX. To basically ACX is the primary format that you use for getting audiobooks ready. This is the company that is Audible and Amazon and iTunes and things like that, and they set the basic requirements, which is a certain noise floor, a certain peak level, an RMS check. So if I do an ACX check on this, you'll see that it passes. So the ACX is a plugin you can get, and it's going to check if your audiobook matches the basic requirements to sell your book on Amazon. So the peak level is minus 3.12. That passes. RMS is 21.95, which passes, and the noise floor minus 75, which passes. So this guy here will not have any problem, and there's no extra clicks, no extra noises, no extra anything inside of here. So that's perfectly okay. So what I did is when I laid these guys down, I saved them as the Audacity files, which also saves just a whole bunch of extra data in here as well. Just leave these things alone. They are required for the Audacity format to work. I also saved each one of them, again, as the high-quality WAV file. As I have the edited files done, what I will probably do, I might keep the WAV files, and I will delete the Audacity files. So let's go ahead and open up Audacity and talk about what we're going to do. Let me close that website there as well. All right, so here is the introduction. You can see it's about 5 minutes long. Now, the other thing I like to do, which I have open on a different computer right now, is I actually have open the book. When I'm doing the recording, I'm either going to use a dual monitor setup, or I have a separate computer where I can read the book easily. And you want to have your system set up so you're not going to be touching your desk. And if I touch the desk, you hear that noise? That's me touching the desk. So when I'm recording these guys, I am sitting as far back away from the desk as possible. I will keep the mouse in my hand on my knee and scroll it there, so I'm not accidentally adding any bumps or noises or things like that inside of the book itself. But if I do, we're going to have to edit those out. So let's go ahead and talk about the setup. First, of course, you do have to follow the video about adding the plugins. If you're using an older version of Audacity like we have here, this is the one that is inside of the Linux Mint repositories. This is the latest version of Linux Mint, most recently updated just last week, and we are still running an older version of Audacity 2.3.3. Now, the latest versions after 3, I think it's 3.0.2, I think, started to include some data tracking. Some Linux distributions are disabling that, some of them are not. If that's something that is important to you, you have to keep that in mind. Basically, don't use the flat packs because that's packaged by them and will be tracking your data. I just use the repository versions. Now, if you have the older version, you will have to install an extra plugin, which is going to be called Rms Normalize. Now, if you have a newer version of Audacity, I think the cutoff was 2.5 or so. They actually added it in because it was so common and so requested, and it is now called Loudness Normalize. So if you have Loudness Normalize, then you do not need RMS Normalize. The only other plugin that you're going to need is you're going to need the ACX Check plugin. So follow along on that other video where we will show you how to get all that stuff put in place. All right. So once we've done that, now we're going to go ahead and start looking at our audio. First thing we want to do is the first track should be just under a second of blank space, but I'm going to listen to the whole thing and see if there's any space in here that that it has any bumps or not. And it's very quiet. So that's perfectly okay. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete down. Now we have just under a second of blank space before the beginning. Introduction. I was conceived on a boat in the middle of Lake Erie. Everyone on board was drunk. Okay, so you listen to this little thing right here. Now I'm going to scroll over here, hold control, and just roll the mouse wheel up just a little bit. I want to get down to having this as expanded as I can, because this is going to show all these guys up here. So this guy right here is something I want to get rid of. Listen to it. Hear it? A little click. These are the things you have a good audio engineer is going to be able to find and take out, maybe even before even listening to it. What's this? That might be an artifact of a trailing sound, or it might be something that needs to come out. Board was drunk. So that's fine. That's the end of the K. So now listen to this. Lake Erie. Everyone on board was drunk, and my life went downhill from there. I know this. So see that one there? Let's go ahead and get rid of that. Now you want to make sure your audiobook has a good conversation type sound to it. Sometimes what I will do, if there's a lot of clicky in my voice or whatever else, I will do something like copy a good known blank spot like that. And anywhere where there's a blank spot, I might just go in and paste it in, and that gives me a very static space between sentences. So let's have a listen to between this sentence and over here and see if that sounds unnatural or not. In the middle of Lake Erie, everyone on board was drunk, and my life went downhill from there. I know. So there's a little bit more of a space there than I like, so I might just copy the whole space and shorten it like that, just with a copy-paste, Control-V. Life went downhill from there. I know this story because it's often relayed to me in anger when certain discussions about that man occurred. So this space is pretty good, but I can probably shorten it down the same way I did the last one. Just copy and paste. My mom was not much for subtlety about her feelings toward the jerk. I mean, Dad. But so this right here, you can see that little gap. Just delete that. But we'll talk more about that later. As for okay, see here, this one here. Yeah, we definitely need to get rid of that. So this is going to be one of the spaces where I'm just going to highlight the whole gap between the word and do that later. As for my mom, there's some clickies there. But this one here is more of a comma and not a sentence. So I actually only want about half of what I have here. So we're just going to eyeball about half of it. So let's listen to that. Every time you make an edit, go back a few seconds and listen to the whole thing again. But we'll talk more about that later. As for my mom, she did what she could given her circumstances. She always worked to pay the bills, to keep my brother and me fed. So there's a gap right here. You can see it right here. Notice that the audio is peaking a little bit to -42. To keep my brother and me fed, and even to provide some pleasures in life. But there were struggles in the home with her domineering second husband. With her street smarts, she had the know-how to leave everything behind to protect herself and her children. On that horribly confusing day... This gap is too long to me. On that horribly confusing day for my 5-year-old self, She secured passage across the United States with a Vietnam War veteran turned hippie, 2 children. And I can see something here. Let's look at the audio peak up here. So there's something there peeking in. Hippie, 2 children in tow, to start a life anew. It was not always easy, but it was a life anew. It was not always easy, but she saw that her... Okay, here are the breath marks here. This is something that should come out, as long as there's not a lot of them. And this, I believe, was something we want to cut in half as well. Let me listen to that. Always easy, but she saw that her physical needs were provided for. Provision. A little click. If you guys saw the little click in there near the end. Bink. Provided for. Provision for our emotional needs, however, was lacking. I grew up as an isolated child, always the punchline of the joke at home and... the joke at home and school. I guess I was just irresistibly easy to tease. Maybe... Oop, not that much. Easy to tease. Maybe it was my bad social mannerisms or the way I would dress myself every morning. Perhaps it was my inability to hold, let alone throw, a football, or the... Okay, this one has a lot of static in there. Or the... So I think up to this point in time, I might have actually still had the headphones on, and I started taking them off as I was recording, because the headphones will occasionally bump into that. Hear that? And those are the things I kind of wanted to get rid of throughout. So you can see here that we are only about a minute into the 5-minute track. So this is why audiobooks take so long to do, is you're basically going to listen to this. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off the camera for now, and I'm going to finish this book up, and then we're going to show you the final wrap-up procedure once I do this, because it's basically all of this going through the whole book, making sure the whole thing sounds good. So we'll be back in a moment, and then we'll do the wrap-up steps. All right, so we've finished through the whole thing. You can see the new time is now 5 minutes and 10 seconds. Now for the trailing end, I try and keep about 2.5 seconds on the trail. So there's 1 second, there's 2.5, so we're pretty close to what we need. And notice there's probably a little bit of bumpiness right there. You can kind of see it right here. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that part out. And then we're going to see how long we have left. So here's 1 second. It looks like we don't have quite enough now. So let's go. There's 1 second. There's 2.5. So I can pull out about this much off the end and still have about 2.5 seconds left. 2.5. So that looks good. All right. So now what we're going to do is we're going to highlight the whole thing, and we're going to run through all those processes. And I had in the other video how to create a macro. Briefly, come under macros, and we can edit these ones here. So we can go ahead and first we start with a filter curve. This is required for Amazon. Just gives us a nicer voice tone. We have the Rms Normalize, which is going to normalize the whole base to the target we need. And then we need the limiter. And then once you finish all that, you're going to save it. So I'm going to apply the macro by under Apply Macro, ACX. So it does all its thing there. So now it's running the limiter. And you'll see here, this is going to get our limit down where it needs to be. And now we're going to run our ACX check. So our peak check passes, RMS level check passes, and our noise floor passes. So now that we have this guy done, we're going to export as an MP3. We're going to put our MP3s over here. So for introduction. Now, I'm not going to enter any tag stuff here. Audacity does not do a real good job on tags. I use a separate program called Kid3 for tags. But I will actually add the tags in when I'm done with the very end, because it's going to make it a lot easier for me to do that. Once we have that saved, I'm also going to export a Wav file, and this just gets dropped over here. So now we'll have a copy of the Wav and a copy of the fully edited MP3. So that is the process that we take by which we're going to edit an audiobook and get it ready for production. Once we have the whole thing done, what I do is I will create a 32 kilobit size one, which I sell on my personal website, but you need the 192s to send to Findaway Voices, to ACX, and anywhere else where you're using them to sell them professionally, because they're going to take those and then they're going to scale them into the size that makes sense for their individual platform. So hopefully this video has helped you out. If you're interested in this book over here, the print and the ebook editions are available. I'll have a link down there in the description here. If you want the audiobook version, well, you're going to have to wait for a little bit. I estimate about 2 months is about the time it's going to take me to finish it, maybe a little bit less, but we'll see what happens when I get in there and start working on it. So with that, thanks for watching, everybody, and I hope that we have helped you to get your writing done.